Hello, my name is Lowell, pronouns he, him, and this is a talk about hour to 90-minute talk about Hearts of Wulin, which I call Talking Hearts of Wulin. I am the designer, meaning the mechanics and system of Hearts of Wulin, and I am the co-writer with Joyce Cheng. Joyce did all of the cultural material in the book. It's about a 50-50 split, I'd honestly say. And anything that is good about that material that is present in the book is thanks to her work. We also had Yiling Wang did our culture and sensitivity reading for this. It did an amazing job. It gave me solid insight, specific things to work on, changes that we made. We cut some sections. We made some changes to names and to other things as a result of that, and I think it's stronger for that. And of course, Agatha Cheng was part of the original development team and was the person who actually kind of pushed me to be willing to take on this game and be willing to play further with it. What we're going to be doing today is I'm going to walk through some things that I've learned, some sections. I've got the outline that I've handed out to participants. I'm going to hit on things that I've noticed, things that are kind of GM reference points, and then kind of leave it open if you have questions about particular flavors of Hearts of Wulin or particular mechanical versions, things like that. Then I ask that you bring them up. I will be looking at over here my character keeper in case I have to check and reference exactly what the text reads, but I also have a copy of the book here as well so that I know what is going on. So let me talk about what Hearts of Wulin really is. It is a game of wuxia Wulin melodrama. It draws its inspiration from a fairly narrow set of things. These are the martial arts novels that are predominantly sourced originally from GMing and Gulong. These were very popular in the 50s and 60s in Hong Kong and elsewhere, serialized novels. They set the template for what these kinds of stories would be, what it meant to be of the Wulin, what wuxia powers were. They set that template, what kinds of stories got told. They are really fun, really interesting. There are translations of them, particularly Legend of the Condor Heroes is available in a couple of different translations here in English. They are very of their time. So do not go in expecting a modern novel. But those were heavily adopted into some Shaw Brothers movies, some other Hong Kong cinema movies in very truncated ways, because these are massive, sprawling things. Any of the adaptations of those you see in a Shaw Brothers film in 90 minutes has cut out almost everything. But then were adapted into long form TV series, 28, 30, 50 episodes of an hour each. Some of them are great. Some of them are just absolutely amazing. There is a series called Laughing in the Wind. It's based on Smiling Proud Wanderer, which is one of Jin Yong's novels. It is old and it's kind of shot on video. The special effects aren't that great, but it is so good. It is so compelling. And there are a lot of those. Eventually, they started adapting other authors. And in the last 2 decades, we've seen the rise of web novels that reflect those. And I'll talk about those a little bit later on. But recognize that where I'm coming from, why I wrote Hearts of Wulin is because I loved those TV series. And this is very much me trying to find a way to play out those stories of romance and conflict and not being able to express one's heart versus one's duty, and having a sprawling cast of characters and having wild things changing all of the time. So that's the source material. There are lot of other flavors of classic historical or fantastical Chinese novels and things that incorporate some of the ideas of this, some detective stories and things like that. Things like Romance of the Three Kingdoms as a historical novel, or The Water Margin, that are really important. Those are kind of not what Hearts of Wulin deals with. They have a different sort of element, different sort of aim than the kinds of media that I'm working with. So I just want to note that, and I'll talk a little bit about that later again. I always say when I go into present Hearts of Wulin is I point out I am a super white dude. Even though I've enjoyed this material, even though I've enjoyed these stories, I'm coming at it from an outsider's perspective. One thing I stress as a GM when I go to set this up for players is that we want to have respect for the source material in the various forms as a drama or movies. So we want to treat that and take it seriously, avoiding any kind of aspects of parody or kind of over the topness. There is over the top, but we want to embrace that and enjoy that and treat it respectfully. This is a fantastic version of China, mediated through several layers here, through the layers of translation, first of all, our experience with these kinds of stories, and then our experience with what makes up melodrama and dramatic elements. There are a lot of interesting things about cultural elements of family and relationships and things like that that we can kind of pick up a bit of, but they're a little bit different than our experience, and recognize that we're going to be treating it through our visions. And so it is not China. It is something else. The last thing I always say to people about these cultural issues is we don't do accents. I think most people know that, but we want to make sure that we do that. I used to say we can do voices, but we don't do accents. I don't say that anymore. And I'll tell you why. Because I've seen some people go into voices and kind of go into some manners about those where it starts to slip into accent or kind of sort of stereotypical presentation, things like that. And so I've stopped doing that. I simply say, don't do accents, and be mindful about how you present that. I think that's really important with this kind of thing when you're working with things where perhaps people have heard things through dubbing or translations or things like that and end up getting really kind of misconstrued versions of things. So I just always want to set that up when I go to play this, because I think it is so important. We are playing a game about characters who live in a liminal world. It is outside of the world of sort of the common folk, though it intersects with that. It is outside the world of the authority and the administration, though it intersects with that. The wuxia world is kind of its own existent society within the society. And I think that's also important to stress to people when they're thinking about this. And I always say melodrama like 5-6 times. I want to make sure people know that what they're getting into is high melodrama. So when I go to run this game, when I go to run a session, a one shot, or even a series, a one shot, my goal is to get characters done in an hour, or more likely like an hour and 15 minutes. I've gotten good at that. I think if you're starting out, you probably should bank on about an hour and a half. That's just my sense of it, because there are some things that people have to engage with. One of the things is I discuss with people what playbooks they want, and get that set. And then in the Character Keeper, I've got to walk through what people need to do. I let them go. As they're creating, I'll explain what elements are, how they work as stats, and how that's different from standard PbtA, And I'll talk about what that means in terms of rolling, how you choose things, and so on. This is a game where I think it's not a problem for people to double up playbooks. I think if two people want to play the loyal playbook, so long as they're both taking different roles, and so long as they have a conversation about what playbook moves they want to take, it's fine to do that. Part of the reason that is because, and this is a point I will make again, a lot of standard PbtA games put a lot of emphasis, a lot of focus on the playbook moves. The playbook moves it's what we're going back to. It's what we're looking at. They really do a lot of the heavy lifting. Apocalypse Keys, for example, is very much like those playbook moves really define everything about the play. It's kind of the other side of things here. You are engaging with the basic moves a lot more in Hearts of Wulin, and then from time to time, you'll find a great opportunity to use one of your playbook moves. I didn't write it that way, but that is how I have experienced it. And when I've talked to other GMs, it's how they've experienced it. What that means as well is that it is in standard Hearts of Wulin, players get a roll move, and then they get 2 playbook moves. If you want to keep things simple, you can give players a roll move and then just have them pick 1 playbook move. Or sometimes they'll say pick 1 playbook move, and if you want to pick another one later on, you can. But players don't have to make all those choices. They can find 1 playbook move. If they choose that, as a GM, your job is super easy, barely an inconvenience. You will see what they have flagged at that point. If they've chosen 1 playbook move, that's the playbook move that has sung to them. And you can note that and make sure that you hit that during the course of a 1-shot or a 2-shot. That's another advantage to choosing, especially if you're doing a short run, having them start with a single playbook move. We have them walk through. We get to the point where we talk about everything, getting their stats set, getting what their style is, getting those things set before we get to entanglements. We have those introductions. We have them do those. One of the things as a GM is, if you've played Hearts of Wulin, you know that the entanglements are a really big thing. And they set a lot of the stage. They do a lot of the heavy lifting. So it means when the players are introducing their characters, you're going to ask them questions because you want to draw out a little bit before they get to entanglements. You don't want to press them on specifics about what's the name of their family member, how many brothers or sisters do they have, those kinds of very concrete things that might be better served emerging in the entanglements phase. You want to ask them things about their characters' sort of general background, about their history, about how they feel, about what they look like. I've discovered that over time. Sometimes I would ask a question in that introduction phase that would lock something in such that it made the player have a harder time when we got to the entanglements. So that's a strategic thing to consider about what you're asking players about in that phase. So I think entanglements are great. I use them everywhere. I rewrote my Changeling PbtA thing to have entanglements, and I've done it in a lot of games. I love them. I like them more than standard relationships, because while standard relationship questions about how do you relate to another PC are great, like Mass, that's super, does it really interesting. It establishes those connections. Entanglements do that, but also build the world and ask the players to define a portion of the world. And I think that's great. An entanglement is a relationship with one party, with one person, that is complicated or affected or impacted by a relationship with another person. It's important that when people make up entanglements, that they give us specific people. So don't say my sensei Don't say my faction. Don't like give us a person, give us a name, give us a character. Always important to do that. Other thing is sometimes players will put in persons in entanglements that, well, my late mentor, or somebody who isn't going to appear on stage as they're presented. If that happens, you've got a couple of choices at GM. You can ask them maybe to reframe that to somebody who is still living or can be present. You can talk about, okay, do you imagine that you have flashbacks to this person, or do you have visions of them? That's another option. The other thing I do is a couple of times I've had people say, oh, my dead mentor, and then I have that dead mentor return, and they're like, oh my God, you're still alive. If someone has done that, has made a dead mentor, that's a great turn that you can do, especially as a hard move later on, to turn that around. But you want to give people want to establish things that they can actually interact with. When yeah, I would say ghosts are absolutely like if you can interact with that, you can have a conversation, or we can bring them into play. As long as we can do that, that's the most important thing about that for entanglements, having the two extra parties there that way. When we do entanglements, of course, we go around once. People choose one of their two entanglements. You got romantic and a standard. They get to choose which one they want to do first, and then which one they want to do second. That'll kind of tell you a little bit about where people are leaning. If people choose their romantic first, it generally means that they've got a very strong sense. If they choose their standard first, it's also often because they're trying to work out things. That's just a little flag for you. Like they're trying to figure out exactly what does romantic mean? How is that actually going to play out in here? What they're thinking about. I tell people, have a PC in at least one of those two relationships, because you've got 4 slots, 2 in each. Have a PC in at least one of them. Most of the time, it will end up that people will put 2 different PCs in there. So you have 2 NPCs and 2 PCs. That's a really good balance. But as long as they have one PC in there, it's fine. If they have all PCs in there, that is can be a problem, because it means they haven't like engaged or drawn in new NPCs, and then I don't have more material to work with. Like I'm going to tell you, the reason I have people to come up with NPCs is that gives me stuff. It gives me content that I can play with. I want to front load that onto the players. If they just go PC, then they've kind of locked things in. You want to see, I mean, if they've got already two PCs in the first one and they go for that in the second one, maybe ask them to move to an NPC in that second one. The other thing is that does kind of lock down some other players' choices when you do that. So we want to keep that open. I know that entanglements are one of the more challenging things to manage as a GM. It's the place where you're doing the most juggling, because as they're going through and writing those entanglements, you need to keep in your head what connections people have made, who the NPCs that they've established are, and if somebody is saying contradicts something or clashes with something that's already been established, you need to kind of keep an eye and ask for clarification, or even ask for a shift in things if that does happen. You will have players who don't listen to other players. You will have those people. You need to like get them to stop and go back. You need to say, oh, how does that fit in with what David's already established? How does what you're saying fit with that? Because David said this about this connection with these two characters. So how does that fit with this? Get them to clarify that. Don't say you misheard or anything like that. Just ask them for clarification. And I think people, if you play with somebody, that there are some players that is an issue. And it can be an issue for new players who are trying to think of their entanglements while people are introducing their entanglements. So it may not be that they weren't listening, it's that they were so intent on figuring their own stuff out that they couldn't keep up with it. It is a cognitive issue, especially in a tight amount of time there. The other thing you want to make sure you're doing as a GM is when you go to a player and say, have you thought of entanglement? And they start to say, make sure that they get a chance to answer before another player says, oh, I have an idea. Try to make sure that that player gets at least a chance to say what they're thinking or express some uncertainty about it. Give them a chance to do that before you let another player kind of step in there. That's a table management thing. And it's particularly important, I think, in that phase of the game. Romantic entanglements are a really important part in Hearts of Wulin, but they don't have to be passionate. They don't have to be sexual if players don't want that. We want to give players who are aromantic or ace a chance to feel comfortable about that. So one of the things I do say to people is romance can mean a simple crush. It can mean a strong passion. It can mean a feeling like I absolutely need to be this person's friend. Like those kinds of feelings of love and connection can be in there if people want to approach it that way. Some people aren't comfortable with romance in the game, and so we want to give them that opportunity to say no. Now, you may want to do a romance matrix, on the lines and veils tab. That's one option. If somebody marks that they don't want any kind of romance, you might want to like message them or talk to them about what they do want out of the game in that case. Like if that's not a thing that they want, how can we shape that? How can we make it so their characters do have emotional connections and emotional like stories? Some of your characters will have secret identities. This is a big ass problem in the entanglement phase. This is something that I've discovered is you need to be aware of. As soon as somebody says, well, I have this identity, but I'm also known as this, what you need to make sure is when they go to establish their entanglement, how do those people in the entanglement know them? Do they know them as you as the masked thief? Or do they know your actual identity? Like you need to get that established, because otherwise you will get to playing and it will get confusing. It would get more confusing. Sorry, it's already confusing, but it's going to get more confusing. This is a particular problem that can get worse if you have a character who has taken, for example, the body double move that's in one of the alternate playbooks. And I've seen a character with a secret identity and then a body double character, and those two characters in the same game, and trying to work out how people knew each other and what things. We got it, and it was wonderful, and it was kind of almost like noises off kind of farce at points. But it did require some management and being willing as a GM to stop and say, okay, like so who do they think you are right now? What do they think is going on? Entanglements aren't set in stone. I often suggest, and the book does suggest, that there's a check-in phase at the beginning of sessions, especially in a long-term game, to say, hey, are you happy with your entanglements? Do you want to make changes to them? People should be willing to do that. If they found that a particular NPC is more appealing to them, or a particular PC is, they should have a chance to do that. Again, if they change it and impact another PC, there should be check-ins for that to make sure that the other PC is good with that. One of the tricks that I have come to, and if you've played Hearts of Wulin with me, you know that I do, especially for one-shots now, I do a page of NPC pictures with some names on them. And that allows players, when they're thinking about entanglements, that they're like, oh, I want to have a beautiful older woman. They can go and look at the NPC tab, find a picture that represents that, and maybe go with that name or maybe change that name. It is an easy tool. Some players want to come up with their own pictures, and that's great, and they want to come up with their own names. But having that resource for players offers them a really useful tool. And I don't have those in my sample character keepers, the ones that I put out there for everyone, just because most of those are pictures from real actors and actresses. But if you can hunt around and come up with those easy to go and find some wuxia Pinterest boards filled with beautiful people that you can put together for characters. One of the things I think that's important to do in that phase when we're doing entanglements is talk just briefly about why entanglements are important and how they're going to be connecting with them. And the major way that players can be connecting with entanglements, besides it kind of being a driver of drama at the table, is the inner conflict move, as you know. Inner conflict is the point at which players come face to face with the struggles of an entanglement that they set up. It can also be for other things outside of entanglements, but entanglements are the big one there. We want to explain to players why inner conflict might come up, why it's cool to roll, the benefit that they're going to get for they're going to get an XP, and what kind of choices they're going to have to make at that. I'll come back and talk about the inner conflict move itself in a moment, but I think that's really important to get that in that rules phase. I don't talk too much about rules. I explain elements and how elements are rolled, and I explain inner conflict, sort of assuming that they know PbtA. By the way, all of this assumes that everybody knows PbtA, which I feel a little goofy about it, but it's worth checking in on that just to make sure people are aware. One other thing that sometimes can get lost when players are creating entanglements is that these entanglements are really written from the perspective of that player. Like, I'm in love with X, but they're in love with Y. What that really means is I'm in love with X, and I think that they're in love with Y. It's not determinant of that secondary relationship. What it is their perspective, and they may discover that that person is not in love with Y, but is in fact in love with them, or is in love with a completely different person. And I think that's something that I sometimes forget, is to stress that these entanglements, that these relationships, these connections are written from that character's point of view. Okay, I'm going to take a drink of water here. Also, tell me if I'm talking too fast. So let's talk about playbooks. We have 6 playbooks, 7 if we count the villain playbook that is in the Hearts of Wulin worlds. And I think it's got some pretty good stuff to it. I think it's fun and worth playing with. One of the things is that, again, for any of those playbooks, there are 3 roll moves. More roll moves, if you include some of the roll moves from the courtly, are fantastic. Roll moves are unique. If one player has a roll move, no other player should have that same roll move. I think you always want to make sure that stands as a unique thing. They might end up with the same playbook move, but generally roll moves, we want to absolutely keep that unique. As I said before, you're going to be going to the basic moves a lot. One of the things is, I think that's a good thing. I've sometimes seen people talk about some PbtA games where, oh, I dislike that I have to go to this kind of fallback overcome move or things like that. I don't feel that way. It's not the way I run. I enjoy going to that because I try to provide a different complexion. That move provides a moment of tension, a moment of choice that things could go either way, and that's like we work as a GM to frame those up so that they're interesting. So we will see sometimes that, especially in a longer game, that players will go through for a session or two, they might not hit any of their playbook moves. And sometimes people will ask for, I have this playbook move, I want to use it. They'll ask for that in wishes. When somebody asks for that or flags that out, make sure that you keep that in mind for the next session or the next part of the game. That's a really good, when people ask for something like that, it's really important. So I want to talk about each of the playbooks here real quickly. So the aware is our venerable master. It's our scholar. It's our person who knows things. They interact with the world through knowledge. Most people, if they choose the aware playbook, I would say 80% of the time, they will choose the scholar role. The master and the traveling teacher are interesting, and sometimes people will choose those, but the scholar is really easy to grasp. It's really easy to grasp. When you look at the roll move there, you can see exactly how it works. It doesn't have a lot of contingency, so people will often gravitate to that. The master has a little bit of a challenge because it is kind of situational. It means there has to be a conflict with an NPC and a conflict that this person would want to bring to a stop. So it is a little more contingent. People have to be a little more proactive when they are using that particular role move. The traveling teacher has a problem. I don't want to say problem, has a consideration that affects a few other moves, as we'll see. It implies that like when you arrive at a new place, when you're in a new area, there's a chance that somebody is going to pop up, and you get to declare that somebody shows up to interrupt events. Again, like the master, this is another one where the person has to choose that as a solution, choose that as a thing to interrupt or to change up the situation. I will say that the Aware playbook has, I would say, the most moves that are contingent upon particular things happening. Just be aware of that, and it's worth looking at that. When people choose the Aware, I look real closely at what playbook move they have chosen. The Bravo is our happy-go-lucky character. It's our roguish character. We have some great ones. The Gallivant is the one that, again, requires defining travel. When somebody chooses a Gallivant, especially in a one-shot, I define travel as going to a new neighborhood or going into a new place that maybe they haven't been, for a while. I try to change what travel means based on the scale of play. So that's worth thinking about. It's not necessarily, okay, we have to go to a new town or we have to go to a new region. We play it out that way. The heads for sale move, and I have to roll down for that, is the one where when you ask for your contacts for something rare or forbidden, you get to roll. That is a very rarely chosen move. It's weird because when I first started running Hearts of Wulin, people took it all the time and did really interesting things for it. But over time, as I've run it, that move has changed in terms of frequency. I have no explanation for that. I don't know if I'm changing the way I'm running or what. It's a very weird thing to me. But the Bravo is our character that is going to be the most upbeat, the most sort of getting away with things in some respects. Loyal is the playbook that I recommend to people who aren't sure what they want to do. If they're unsure, I'll point to the Loyal. and I'll often point to the swordsman. This because the swordsman, you can get that. They're good with their weapon. They are good at fighting, and the move is solid. It gives them an extra wounded box, so they can just mark and not have to worry about it. It's a very easy thing to grok as a player, and it's pretty fun. You can just shrug off a wound at any point, and you get to kind of describe what that looks like. Uh, the flying daggers move from the loyal is the one where you can spend a bond to be where somebody else is at. People will always take that. Like, that's a great move. It appears in a lot of other PbtA games, and it is always fun. It is always delicious. It's a good default if people ask, well, what should I take? I always suggest that one. The one that is kind of a real flag is the lawless kingdom move I've got there. And what that is people get a big benefit, a big bonus if they find out that someone has lied to them or broken a promise to them. That means that if somebody takes that move, you have to have somebody lie to them or break a promise to them. I mean, that's a flag, but people are asking for that, and you need to make sure you give that to them a couple of times. Like, that's the kind of person who I'm going to have their dead mentor come back and turn out to be the bad guy. That's just how that's going to work. The outsider is I don't know, maybe Aragorn. I want to say he is our brooding lone wolf character, but not really a lone wolf, because even if they're a lone wolf, they still need to be connected to people. They still need to have that. Sometimes people will describe themselves as having been away for 7 years, and just coming back. Well, then, okay, how do you know these other people? Like, what do you remember about them? You need to get that out there. They may be isolated, but they still need to be connected to the world that we're building up here. Again, the outsider is not just an outsider to normal society. It is an outsider to Wulin society. And that's actually the most important relationship, is that within the context of the Wulin factions, the societies, and so on, they stand apart and outside of it. The trickster role move is the one that allows you to always use hearts and minds, even on people who would not normally be susceptible. What that move implies by its existence is that there are people who are not susceptible to hearts and minds. It means that there are going to be people who are of higher station, of higher mental fortitude, who may not be susceptible. And the hearts and minds move talks about this a little, but just remember that is a situation and is a thing that can be a kind of a hard break. I know sometimes in PbtA, we don't want to declare that, no, you can't do that. That's one of those cases you can say no, but, or yes, but. Those are places for that. I would say that the outsider has the most well-rounded of the playbook moves. Like they're a really good set of easy to get ones. The student is another one that's pretty well-rounded. We've got Hopeful Apprentice, which is the move there that battles someone above your scale. Like, that's a very specific, very contingent one, that essentially you're going to hold the line against somebody who's more powerful. It means that as a GM, you need to get that opportunity for them to stand in place to protect others. The face to fate move is a very mechanical move in there. I'll just point that out. That's one that you have to check in at start of session. I don't have a lot of start of session moves in Hearts of Wulin, but that is one to note if somebody's taken that role and taken that move. I'm not going to talk about the villain, because the villain is just kind of interesting and cool. It's got some neat stuff in it. It's in that Hearts of Wulin Worlds book. It is one that I would recommend for people who've played Hearts of Wulin a couple of times. I wouldn't recommend it as the first playbook that you play when you play it, because there are some implications about, presenting yourself as a villain, but actually having a heart of gold, that kind of thing that can be tough. But the other playbook is the unorthodox. An unorthodox playbook, if somebody chooses that, it is the thing that is most likely to change up what's happening at the table. It is the thing that's most likely to throw a monkey wrench into what's going on, and in terms of tone and in terms of play style and so on. That's why it's important to do cats at the start, check in with things, because we've got the accidental, and the accidental is a character who says that they don't know martial arts and believe that they don't know martial arts, but somehow they manage to do this. It can be a comedic character, and it's okay if people want to have comedy and if people are on board on that, but that is a place where you want to check in if somebody takes that. I have seen people play it in a non-comedic manner, in the way that their character like was only barely trained, and so they think that they're very bad at martial arts, but in fact they were a natural at it, kind of thing. The hidden is one of those playbooks which I talked about before that has a secret identity. So when you do entanglements, you need to establish, do they know the person's real identity? Do they know the hidden identity? Like, what is that about? So you need to establish that and get that connection done. Basic moves. Let me come to this page here. Let me truncate myself maybe a little bit here. I mentioned that overcome for me is a good standard fallback move. I think it's really useful. The move that gets most overlooked of the basic moves is impress. Impress is the move that allows you to impress others, to make a performance, to succeed at a competition, to do any of those things. It is also super useful because the results of the impress move allow you to clear elements, allow you to create bonds. Your character has to put themselves out there and risk things and get out there and perform, but they can get a lot from that. And so you want to consider that. I would say that though that it is the one that players go to the least. So let me talk about the worst written move of the basic moves. I'm going to admit this up freely and ahead of time. Comfort and support. Comfort and support, the intent of it is that you go and help someone and they get a +1 to their roll, or they clear an element. So the way that it is written, on a hit, and the 7 to 9 hit, they can clear an element, or they can give you a bond with them that you can then spend immediately to help them. And then on the 10 plus, that you also get the choice of, do you clear an element or do you give them a bond with you that you can spend? Because the techniques of bond are, you can spend any bond that you have to help yourself, or you can spend a bond that you have with person X to give person X a +1. That's the structure that we've got that written. That sometimes gets bogged down in play. It sometimes is unclear. It sometimes gets lost. I get lost on it sometimes. If you're finding that that's the case, the way that I approach that is, when you do that, when you create, do that comfort and support, when you succeed on a hit, that person can write in a bond, and then that person can choose to spend it, to give themselves a +1 or not, or maybe they'll just sit on that bond. That's probably the easier way to approach it. And if I were going back to rewrite it, I would probably rewrite this that way. That's one of the changes that I would probably make. There's a certain amount in my head that I was like, well, obviously, because they have a bond with them, that's where the energy for the connection is coming from. and I got stuck in that. And I couldn't get out of that cycle when I went to writing it, even in multiple editions and versions of it. Hearts and Minds is an important move. The 7-9 result on it gives some interesting choices that the GM can apply. Like you can alienate, hesitate, overreact, reveal. But you should also consider, especially if we're in a situation where we're trying to keep the pace or the feel of the game up, it's also okay simply to say that, yes, you do get what you want with that 7-9 result. And I would say I'm about 50-50, like letting them have the thing versus choosing one of those results. That move also ties into the player versus player move and conflict between players. Sometimes players will have different desires. If one player wants something and the other player wants a different thing, or one player wants to convince the other one, the first thing to check in and say is, do you want to do this via Hearts and Minds? Hearts and Minds offers the player who's kind of targeted for the change an incentive, like it offers them, oh, maybe they'll get an XP. But some people may feel strongly like they don't want to go, like their character feels very strongly about this thing. That's not a role, not a playbook move, not a basic move that they want to go to. So you need to check in and ascertain what kind of the emotional connection is there. If players feel very strongly about that they don't want to go to roll move, that they would definitely say no, that it's very clear that's who it's going to go to, that the stakes are very high, that's when you go to the PvP, the player versus player, where you negotiate the conflict, where one player makes an offer to get what they want, and the other player decides yes or no on that. Inner conflict is the most important move in the game. It is also the one that requires the most check-in. It is an opportunity for drama. We've established these entanglements. We've established these places that people are interested in. But the thing is you want to do is, and people who've played with me in Hearts of Wulin know I do this, I will ask someone, does this rise to the level of inner conflict? That gives the player a choice of how important is this to them? How dramatic is it to them? How much they would have put on the table? Let them make that choice. And sometimes they'll say, boy, that does sound like that rises to the level of inner conflict if it's pretty clear to me that that's what they're leaning. But if somebody says, no, I don't think it does, that's fine. That's the way they want to play. That's the scene that they want. So you want to abide by that. There is an XP incentive to rolling inner conflict, so that is pretty cool. I had some people in playtesting get worried that having that inner conflict move allowing you to get XP would allow people just to milk that for XP. I have never seen that. But if it would prove to be a concern for your table because your table does that kind of thing, the easy solution to that is to say you get XP the first time per session that you roll inner conflict. That's an easy fix for that if that is a concern. Boy, I've almost talked for an hour. Look at that. I am a terrible person. One of the big changes, the other mechanical thing that I have changed in my approach is how I assign experience. The rules as written suggest that at the start of session that players highlight a particular entanglement and they get more XP for that entanglement. That's an unnecessary step. The way that I do it now is you've got two entanglements. If you've engaged or interacted with one of those entanglements, you get 2 points. If you have engaged with both of them, you get 3 points. Simple, easy to read, easy to track. That's a change that I realized not long after we kind of had done the final editing, that way was a better approach to it. So I think it's worth doing. Let's see what I want to hit. One of the questions is about I've had from people is about scale and how I do things. Scale is contingent on drama on one hand, but it's also conditioned and contingent on like what our game is. If we are doing a one-shot game, then what I will determine is when we get to that end fight, it's going to take three things. If we've got a four-player game, it's going to take three things to reduce, three steps to reduce that foe scale down so that somebody can go at them. That, and I'll kind of make that clear because that gives players a chance to get engaged with that big final fight. Generally, I have other things that they have to fight before they get to the big bad, but encourages them to think about that. And that kind of fighting, that kind of scale reduction can be an overcome. It can be a creative use of a playbook move. It can be hearts and minds. You will allow the players to come up with interesting ways to reduce the scale. Sometimes players will have done that new technique move in between, the one that allows players to find a way through. That's a great way to lower the scale a degree or two right away without having to do anything in the scene. The thing I always stress is, let's say that people have spent the round and three players have gone through and have reduced this person's scale down so that the fourth person can make that strike. I stress, you have one shot at this. You have one moment. You need to do this, because if you don't do this, he is going to rise up. He's going to throw off whatever chains or whatever distraction you've put on him, and it's going to be bad. Put all the pressure in the world on them at that moment. Make them spend their resources. Give as much weight as possible to that. You want to slow down and describe that. And if they fail, that's when one of their NPCs throws themselves in the way and tragically dies. That is your go-to. Like, that is the price of failure in these games. Self-sacrifice is easy for heroes. Your own death is easy. NPCs, things they care about, if they have a strong sense of personal identity, maybe the loss of a limb, that's a classic from One-Armed Swordsman, things like that. Those are the costs of failure in those big fight duel segments. When the foes are of lower scale or their troops, that is the time when players go to fight troops and they win, or players go to fight somebody with a lower scale and they win. Let them milk that description. Let them tell me how awesome you are. Tell me what you do to absolutely devastate that. Let them go to town on it, because it is fun. It is fun to do that. Sometimes players will worry because they haven't seen a lot of wuxia films, or they haven't seen a lot of martial arts films. I tell them, just describe a cool fight. Just describe like what you're doing that looks cool on screen. Have you seen John Wick? Have you seen any action TV show? Just go with that, and celebrate that. And I do, because people come up with stuff that I would never have thought of, and I love it. So that's all really important to me. There are some other things to talk about. We've got about 30 minutes left, so I want to say one thing about a particular framework, because we've got fantastic wuxia and shansha in the book. We've got like the mystery solving stuff that's in the Hearts of Wulin worlds. There are lots of things to be said about that. But the one thing I want to mention is, and this is David came to me a week or two ago and was asking about this. The courtly playbooks, the courtly framework that is in Hearts of Wulin is kind of very narrowly focused. It makes the assumption that the game that you're playing in a courtly game is literally a court, that there is a court with politics and dynamics. There is a figure of authority. There are institutions. You are interacting with those. The various diplomatic moves, the choices that you make there all revolve around that. The playbook moves all revolve around that. If you were doing a more broadly political game, like that wasn't centered in a court, like you had people from different regions doing different things, that's a different matter. That's a very different thing. And I think it would require some adaptation of the rules to get that to work, because it is framed pretty narrowly. And that's because there is a real tradition of these wuxia melodrama stories that are set in courts, and that's the inspiration of those. That's why it approaches those in that particular way. All right, I'm going to stop talking and see if there are some questions, some things people want to talk about, things people want to ask about, your experiences. Anybody have anything that they want to bring up at this point? You can either raise a hand or write in the chat.
I've been making. Oh, sorry. Go on, Shane. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Let's do Shane and then come to Gerwin.
So I had a question about combining some of the optional rules and, alternate settings and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if you just had any reflections on, like if I want to run a courtly game with fantastical elements, like how would you approach that? Or, combining the mystery rules with, one of the other settings or something like that.
Yeah, one of the things I've done is in the mystery rules, I do have some notes on moves, like how the other fantastic playbooks and things fit in with those. I have, when I've gone through, kind of rewritten the playbooks a little bit when I've combined things, and based on my experience, I've cut moves that people don't usually take to bring in those other things, bringing in like the most interesting of the moves. Now, mind you, you could have everything, but I think that there's a little bit of cognitive overload. So I want everybody to have everything. I would love people to have like 16 moves to choose from, because I got all that. And every time I go to do this, I want to do that. But I know that it is too overwhelming. So I do make strategic cuts on that to cut things down. What I'll sometimes do is then put a set of moves that I have cut like on another tab. So if players like aren't finding what they want as the game goes on, they can go and look at those and choose those out. But I think that there are some interesting things from the courtly, like there's some great playbook moves from the courtly that could be applied. If you just want a game that has some wild politics to it, you could probably take one or two of the basic moves from there that are interesting to bring that in and bring it into fantastical. I mean, you could do like a Court of the Gods kind of thing, as well. So that would be my take on it. I love all the playbook moves. Like, I'm the person who buys all the splat books for all the character options and wants to have those all for people. But I also recognize in the span that we have usually at the table, that is a little too much. That would be my thing. But I do think, like, here's the thing: the fantastic wuxia stuff fits in almost everywhere. You can grade like how much fantasy you want in there. There's a little bit of fantasy, like painted skin level of fantasy, where you've got some magical creatures, and then there's the really high fantastical stuff, the Shansha, like the Zoo Mountain Warriors, is the real high end. But I think the fantasy stuff can go in any game, and it looks cool. because you get to describe stuff with more cool special effects. So that would be my thing.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to jump in there and say I did actually run that combination myself. I used both the courtly and the supernatural playbook stuff in one game, and it actually worked out really well. I took a very similar approach to what Lowell just suggested. I basically looked through all of the basic playbook moves and tried to fit in both like one of the courtly moves, one of the supernatural moves for each playbook, and basically just took out the ones that seemed least appropriate for the style of game I was going for, and replaced those with the supernatural courtly varieties, and that seemed to work out quite nicely. It was a lot of fun, that game. It was kind of vaguely, I'm now going to completely forget the name of the series, but I was going for the sort of feel of the Netflix series with
the Untamed.
The Untamed, that was it. Yes, yeah, that was the one where they are kind of both important characters in the political realm, whilst also being, ridiculously awesome supernatural martial artists, and that was kind of the vibe I wanted to get, and it absolutely delivered on that. So that's a thumbs up from me on that.
I will mention that The Untamed is based on a series of web novels that have been translated into English. That's called The Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. They are very different from the TV series, and they are much more wonderfully gay. Like they are super queer. They are a delight. They are so good. I like The Untamed, but I love the books. Garrett?
Going back to something you said right at the very start on
Sure.
not doing accents, how do you find a voice for an NPC? When you sit around a table in a traditional game, I would do mannerisms and things to try and actually allow people to identify which NPCs are talking and to give them a little bit of character. Is there any sort of advice or guidance you can give on that?
Yeah, I think as you say, it's really challenging to do that in an online game. One of the things I definitely do is I try to do body posture with NPCs. A simple like gesture, a mannerism, leaning into the camera, leaning away from the camera, and go big to demonstrate that. Talking with their hands, you have to do bigger gestures for that. The real emphasis I try to do is like volume of delivery, soft voice, hard voice, heavy voice, and speed of delivery, whether someone is talking really fast or they're kind of stopping with this, trying to get those kinds of voices that maybe reflect that character's inner inner manner, like trying to illustrate character through that style of speech. That's what I've gravitated towards for online a little bit more. Like I'll head bob with particular characters. That's another one I can do. I think there's a set of gestures. We often don't, because we're online. We often forget that we can use the camera as a toolkit for that. But yeah, it does limit what we're doing when we're on this. But I think there are some bits like that you can use. Other questions? Oh, let's see here. Dance is a duel in a courtly game. Yeah. One of the things that's a really good point is, while duels are structured as fighting conflicts, and there is a social duel move from the courtly, if there's a kind of a competition between you can use duel with different kind of stakes. You can do that as a battle between two characters. Other questions? Jonathan?
Thanks, Lowell. David mentioned in the chat earlier about custom moves, and I was curious, what are some of your favorite and other folks' favorite custom moves?
I will say that I have custom moves as kind of a safety valve in the game. If people aren't finding a playbook move that they want, but as a result of the fact that it takes 8 XP to get an advance, I don't see custom moves all that often. There are some examples in the book about those. I like custom moves when people choose them that allow them to just do something magnificently, like they are an illustrious dancer, and because of that they can do this extra thing. That's really important to me. Sometimes people will want custom moves that kind of make them bigger or badder on the battlefield, and those kind of aren't as interesting. Like one thing I've seen is somebody did it so that they could take on 2 different mobs of troops, and that's fine, but it also potentially takes some scene drama away from other players. If somebody is eating up all the bad guys, is taking care of all the bad guys, it can be a bad one. I like moves that combine a couple of things. Like I can't remember what it was, but I had one where they got a benefit, but then they could also ask or declare a particular study thing about, like, related to something. I can't remember what that was. Has anyone else seen any custom moves that struck you, David?
Yeah, I was going to say again, same game I was just talking about, but I used them quite a lot because I was again playing in a supernatural based game where the assumption is they come in a bit more because you use them for kind of building up people's specific cool things that they can do outside the norm. So I had some quite fun ones in that. Well, I'm thinking of one off the top of my head where somebody had the power to like control spiders as their thing. So it was kind of like, yeah, you can get like your spiders to do stuff for you, and you can like specifically do these certain things and make a roll. And one of the sort of the consequences of, like, if you get a mixed success or a fail on the roll is that like people are just really freaked out and they think you're evil because you're controlling spiders. It's it's that sort of idea. But yeah, I felt like, yeah, the guidance in the book on creating the custom moves for specifically for like the supernatural playbook I found really, really useful. And I thought, just like for not just for the game itself, but like as in terms of like PbtA discussion on custom moves, I thought the stuff in there was really excellent. So yeah.
And David, you had
Yeah. So this is a little bit of an outlier, but it's over a year ago I ran a short series where it was a like a cyberpunk hack of Hearts of Wulin based off of kind of like cyberpunk anime, things like Psychopaths and Ergo Proxy and things like that, Ghost in the Shell. And one of the playbooks was you could play as a rogue AI. You were in an artificial intelligence that achieved some kind of self-awareness, and one of the moves you could take as part of that was when your body dies, like when you are destroyed, when your character is dead, your consciousness gets automatically re-uploaded to a cloud and stuck into a different body, and you just come back. But when you do that, you roll, and on a mixed success, 7 to 9, some part of the file gets corrupted along the way.
Oh, I like that.
And you come back with a slightly different personality, and the way that's mechanically reflected is you change your style element. So you have to like choose where you want to put your numbers for your elements to reflect the fact that your style element may be changing over the course of the game.
Oh, that's great. I love that. I will say, and this is one of the things I love about David's cyberpunk hack that he did, is it's a very different cyberpunk PbtA reskin of Hearts of Wulin than the one that we have in Hearts of Wulin Worlds. Like Hearts of Wulin Worlds is very much about sort of virtual gladiators and things like that, but yours takes a more anime cyberpunk take on it, and I really, really love that. It's really sharp. Gerwin?
The only time I've really done custom moves, the standard scenario I do when I run it for a new group is the fighting over the possession of a deceased master's sword. and I normally give the sword additional options that they can use when fighting mooks and fighting troops and other things. But beyond that, I've not really done much when it comes to custom moves itself, but actually making the sword itself, rather than just saying +1 scale, which is a standard thing, actually giving it something that makes it that little bit different, and that the player who holds it can actually do something just a little bit different. I've done it several times over the past where you can destroy, basically the sword cuts through anything, so you can do collateral damage while you're actually fighting in the same sort of manner as the unorthodox and things like that. And just when you engage in fights, everyone knows it's there and it draws trouble to yourself. So you can automatically get a mixed success if you fail. But trouble's coming because people know that the actual blade is there and people will come looking for it.
Very nice. I do want to say one thing more before I realized I hadn't covered that before I asked for more questions. The study move is a place where people who play classic PbtA can get hung up. Because people are looking for lists of questions, and it's a move that opens up the possibilities. While it does open things up for players, you can get people who will freeze on that. So recognize that that's a thing that can happen and that you want to help them. The idea that you can declare something, sometimes players will balk at that. And instead they'll ask a question, and it becomes clear to you as a GM that they have an answer, but they kind of don't feel right about saying that. That's the point at which you kind of like try to tease out maybe what it is they actually wanted to declare. Like, you're asking this question in this particular way. Why are you asking it that way? It is worth taking the time when somebody does that to remind them you can make a declaration with your hold, or you can ask a question. And sometimes they'll ask a question because they honestly don't know. They want to be surprised. They want to see what comes next. They want to have a twist. They want to have a turn. And if players throw the answer into my court, I will. They've given me that freedom because they've decided not to choose. I'm going to choose for them. Thank you very much for giving me that power for the moment. But if somebody does like ask a question and they're angling towards something, ask them, like, what are you saying here? What are you going to, and draw that out. The other thing is that when a player makes a declaration, there are certain things like there are some places where things have already been established, or things that it would impact another player's autonomy or would affect another player's like key NPCs. That's the point at which I might say, well, that's actually affecting that. Let's pull back. Let's dial back in that. But generally, when people make declarations, those stand as a GM, and that can be a challenge because as a GM, you've got to be brave to be willing to run with what the players have thrown out there for you. But it can be really cool. I don't, more than any other PbtA game, I don't tie myself down to any kind of conception about where we're going to be going. I know kind of what I would like to have. I'd like to have a big scene so we can get it done right on the hour kind of thing. But I'll work with what the players give me, especially if they give me cool twists. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? David.
Yeah, I just had one quick question about if you could speak at all about how using pre-made NPCs as part of the setup might look. So like in a one-shot, for example, I could see a scenario where you say, okay, this is your setup. Here's an important NPC. Here's an important NPC. They're on the NPCs tab to start with. That's kind of where you're at. I know that with the Silk Punk setting, you have a royal house kind of already set up where you have kind of like an emperor, and these are his wives that he has had, and these are his two heirs to the throne, and they spend a good deal of time setting things up. And I was curious if you could speak as to how to do that in a way that doesn't really step on people's toes if they have their own ideas for world building or how they'd like things to look.
I think having a mix of characters that are identified by a name and role with characters that you maybe just have a name for that you can run with is the best way to do that. Like, for example, when I do the various nameless secrets games, I will have the NPCs names, and then I'll have just like a very basic description, like drunken master, or sensei of, or master of this school, just enough to kind of give us, okay, we know what their role is, but we don't know much more than that. You know, maybe we know that they're daughter of this other character. I think you can establish some frameworks there that still allow, open approaches. And to screen share briefly here, just briefly. So let's take a second to resolve up in a moment here. Okay, come on. Screen share is loading. There we go. So like for the various wedding scenarios that I do, that first row, I have their names, and then I have just a note on who they are. And then the rest is names and relationships that people can fill in. I think if you want to have some signpost characters like to build around, I would say, how do I do this? Between 4 to 8. Like 4 to 8 is about how many you would want to have with like real concrete signposts, because that's about how many people can grasp, like when they're kind of looking through, and then have some NPCs that are more open. If I'm going to be really concrete about that's how I would approach that. Anything else? Any other thoughts, questions? Gerwin?
One of the issues I had initially with the game when I started running, during setup, you get an awful lot of NPCs to try and keep track of. Trying to actually generate relationship charts can be incredibly, well, let's just put it this way, spider web has nothing on it. One of the things I tried to do initially was to limit the NPCs to the ones that they set up from the factions, but then have them come in for the entanglements. Is there a better workaround than that, or is there?
I have found, and again, I go back to this having a page with pictures and names and offering it up to players as a choice. Like if you want to use those NPCs, if you want to find one on there that will fit for that. I found that once somebody has established an NPC, as we do the go-arounds, and I don't do a process of establishing characters and factions early on. We're only establishing NPCs in those two entanglement phases, the romantic and the standard. I found that once a person has like established and gone, okay, well, I want Captain Feng to be my romantic interest, and we stop and we signpost that, we've marked that in, is other players will then, as they're coming around to their entanglements, look and say, oh, I could probably work Captain Feng into mine. I think there's a natural gravity that occurs once people have established some, and it does A, create a tighter bundle of NPCs, and B, a tighter set of relationships. That's the technique that has worked best for me. I think it's subtle, but it just over time I've noticed that does occur, because I had that problem early on. Like we used to have 3 entanglements in the entanglement phase, and then it was pointed out to me at Origins, we could probably just do with 2. by a good person. I think having those pictures, being willing to do that online. If I am playing a game face to face, I have a set of cards that I've printed out with pictures and names on them. And then we've got those out on the table, and we can put them out in the middle once somebody has chosen somebody. And that also creates that kind of gravity. And I will also say, if somebody goes, oh, and this, maybe I want to be, I'm in love with this person, that's the point at which I go, well, Captain Fang is pretty good looking. He is pretty hot. Maybe you can include him as a love interest. Like that's my job during entanglements, is to kind of try to slide into their DMs to get these relationships and hookups going. All right. I want to thank you all for coming and listening to me babble about a game I wrote. It is a game I still love. There's at some point in the future, when I get Hearts of Wulin back in my hands, I hope to do some other material for it, and come up with some other ideas and things. Certainly, I would like to find somebody with a background in Japanese history, from Japan or so on, to do a good fantasy samurai a version of it. I think that could be really wonderful. I think there's a lot of places to explore more. So thank all of you for coming and doing this. And I am going to stop the recording.